is the Happy Scientist Podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happy scientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Well, welcome back to the Happy Scientist, and once again, I'm joined by Dr. Laura Grassi, which is a change from Nick, but you will hear Nick again next week, and I think you heard him last week. It's a constantly changing environment. Today, we're going to talk about a subject that was actually suggested by Laura, and that is the importance of questioning the status quo. Well, we did here. We changed the status quo, have somebody else on to talk about it. So that's what we're going to jump into right now. Now, I know there's a lot of structure in the scientific world because it's a big world, and so there are some things that are sacrosanct that well, it's just always been done that way, or this is the way we do it now, and it's a change from the past, but it's the new way. So it got me wondering about just the notion of status quo as a concept. So Laura, what do you think? Let's define status quo. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, that's a a difficult question to start with, but I think it's an important one. Uh, I think it's anything that is just what is done, like you said, anything that's just from the way you, in a scientific perspective, from the way you do experiments to the way you write and get grants to the way they hire people to the way reagents are set out in a lab. It could be anything. Just the idea of how anything is done right now is what I would say is called the status quo.
Yeah, I was thinking about a couple of different ways to approach it, because at the beginning I was thinking it's just the status quo, like it's a singular thing, but it's not. It could have to do with things like how management hierarchy works. It could be scientific protocols. It could be the hours that your laboratory operates and when you're expected to be there. Could be financial considerations, like you mentioned about grant writing and that kind of thing. Could be about social considerations, how you work together with other people, and it could be about what are acceptable risks and the ethics of what you're doing in science. So there's a lot of things there that if they are chiseled in granite, you really are shackled. You're held to not just a certain standard, but a certain operating environment, and if you can't flex at all, that's gonna certainly impact the kind of discovery you can do and the kind of experiments you might even undertake. So all that being said, there's all this structure out there in the world. Isn't it there for a good reason? Isn't that why there's a status quo?
Yes and no, and I think there's good places for things to be rigorous status quo when we do them the way we do them, and I think science is not necessarily one of those places. I think actually often the reason the status quo exists is because people are scared and they want security. And we do it this way. We know it worked. Why change it? And you're going to get results that way. But I'd argue that actually, if you look back to when science was done before, when it was people who had a lot of money that did it as a hobby, that there was less of a status quo. It was more people did things the way they did because they had that freedom. They weren't relying on a paycheck. They weren't relying on the fact that they need to get the publications in order to have a job, or progress to PI or whatever it is that they want to do. They didn't need that safety.
Sure. Well, to my mind, bioscience is a little bit special in the realm of science, because you're dealing with living things. And so that kind of adds a layer of responsibility that doesn't exist if you're a physicist, or you're an astronomer, you know. But still, questioning the status quo can be quite risky. So, I and in I was just thinking about that in terms of the stories that everybody knows. Galileo questioned how the uh, how the sun did not, in fact, revolve around the Earth, and boy, did he get a lot of trouble for that. you know, so so, but here in the modern world, we're past a lot of that. But still, what happens if you question the status quo? How does that work out?
I think that depends on what kind of status quo you're questioning, but I think there's always going to be repercussions and not always positive ones. And I think one of the issues we have is that there's quite often negative repercussions for questioning the status quo. If that is, for example, you're in a lab, you're a new person in the lab, and you want to do something differently, you want to do a technique in a different way, you might come up with a lot of, conflict there with maybe someone who is an established postdoc or an established PI that's always done it that way. It's always get results. So why change it? That you could have that, or if we're talking about a much wider concept of questioning the status quo, and I think the bigger the status quo you're trying to question, the potentially bigger hurdles you'll face is, for example, if you're trying to say, actually question the status quo in terms of scientific findings and say, we've always thought that X works this way, but actually, I think it's different, like you say, with Galileo, and that that's when you can come up with really big hurdles and potentially career destroying, or if you look at it more positively, career making.
hmm Well, yeah, that's it. And for those of us who sit outside of the scientific realm, we see laboratories as these very scary, dangerous places where if you don't do it right, you're going to blow up 3 city blocks of lab, But I suspect that's probably not usually what you're up against.
Yeah, obviously there's certain status quo for like handling chemicals and things like that, or like you said, because biology deals with living things. For example, if you are doing clinical trial work or working on animals, there are rigorous protocols in place, and that has to be followed. But that still doesn't mean that you don't have to question those protocols and the way it's done, and have discussions with people, because that's how science progresses.
Sure. And, obviously there's some things are, call them settled science. Like there's things that are settled law. And, we hang on to those things because they have been discussed. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel every day. On the other hand, every once in a while you got to go, you know what, um, there's a bigger world than that existed when this was first decided. We know things now that weren't known before, and it's worth having the discussion again. And I don't know. I mean, as you mentioned, especially if you're doing things like working on animals, um, some people are very upset about that from an ethical standpoint. That added a new layer, a new component. But it's people used to live a much more agricultural life, and they had animals in their life, and they knew about that, and they knew about call it good husbandry. And nowadays, it's like the only animals we encounter are pets, you know. So we may look at things a little differently, but but that being said, are we never going to question anything again? I mean, how can anybody sign up for that? That no, we've already decided everything. It's all done. You know.
I think if you see that way, if your way of looking at the world is there are no more questions that need asking, or the status quo doesn't need changing, then I think perhaps science is not quite the right career. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
firmly believe, like, I remember I started learning about Socrates, and that one of the things that really struck me was his teachings of question everything. And I think that really is fundamental to any scientific research. And actually, anyone should be doing this, but science especially is question everything. Even if it's you're not actually going up to a supervisor and questioning it in your head, question it and look up the literature and think other ways. It might be that actually it is perfectly fine the way it is and there isn't a better way to do it, but questioning it could reveal something interesting.
Sure. Well, yeah, and we're not talking about questioning with cynicism. We're talking about questioning with curiosity. And as you say, sometimes you question something, and I don't see a better way right now. Doesn't mean there isn't a better way, though. It just means you don't see one yet. And that allows you the freedom then to say, you know what? Perhaps I'll question this again in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good distinction that you make there between questioning with curiosity and cynicism. I think that's a really important distinction. You shouldn't be questioning to trip people over or to be negative or to cast doubt on people. It should be a genuine curiosity and a genuine desire to do things better.
Right. Exactly. So one of the things I was thinking about how you know, one of the benefits of the status quo is it provides a certain amount of security. It's a foundation that we're building on. So if we're no longer going to use the status quo as the basis of our security, where are we going to get that security from in the future?
Yeah, that's difficult. And there's an element of you don't want to be too comfortable. You don't make good discoveries, or you've got to take a risk in order to get somewhere. If you just spend your life being comfortable and in a safety zone, you're really quite limited in what you're going to be able to do. That being said, I think maybe my perspective is that you can get that security by a mental shift in terms of thinking actually that security, that safe place of not questioning the status quo is more dangerous and potentially less secure than questioning it, because and obviously you've got to be careful of like survivorship bias and all that kind of stuff. But if you look at some of the great scientists, the people, Nobel Prize winners, the people that are publishing regularly in Nature, they are not people that sit in the comfort zone. They're not people that sit with the status quo. They are the ones asking the questions.
In the show notes, I'll have a link to an article that's entitled "There's No Such Thing as a Comfort Zone." Might be worth someone looking at. May find it interesting. It's a short read. Um, this is something that is somewhat unique about science. I'm not saying it's only exists in science, but there's a lot of jobs out there, a lot of careers out there where discovery is just not a part of the game. It's things stay the same, and they need to stay the same, but that's not necessarily true here in science. That being said, though, it can be quite destabilizing to someone individually. So what if you're just not comfortable rocking the boat? What if you don't want to be the person questioning? Well, how do you manage that?
I think you start small. Um, you don't have to jump in there and suddenly one day going from being someone that just goes with the flow to someone that questions everything, but just start questioning some things, little things. Oh, where do we get our reagents from? Is there a better supply? Can we save some money here? Things that are kind of like low risk
Yeah, yeah,
questions. And see, the proof is in the pudding. Then, does it work out? Actually, was there a positive outcome to you questioning that status quo? And build slowly on that. And what you might find is the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it, and you suddenly find yourself years from now asking questions that you never thought you would be brave enough to ask, and it paying big rewards.
sure. Now, that being said, sometimes you might question the status quo, and you will discern that, you know what, the status quo is just right. It's the best thing we've got so far, and that's not a loss. There's no that in fact stabilizes that position. It solidifies that, you know what, we are on the right track, and that's not a bad thing. And if there's something in your world that is just not allowed to be questioned, that's scary. you know we have to be able to say, wait a minute, why do I have to turn on the lights in the lab? Well, because you do like to see. By golly, I do like to see. I think I should turn the lights on. you know, we don't want to blow that off. Like, how dare you question whether or not we turn on the lights? You know, you never know what will be uncovered in a question, and sometimes it maybe didn't help anything but yourself. Maybe you learned, like, you know what, time for me to be a little more humble and realize that some smart people went before me and they figured a few things out, and that's good.
Yeah, I agree because there's probably going to be lots of times where actually the way we do it or what was known is still right. But again, it's about not taking offense if you questioning it doesn't, it's not trying to trump people saying, oh, I know better because I'm questioning you. It's about genuinely wanting to find out if this is the best way or there is another way. And like you say, that it's okay and perfectly fine if the way the status quo is good. And I think it's important for there to be an environment where people feel comfortable questioning that. And ironically, although science is about questioning, I would say there's a lot about the scientific environment that doesn't like questioning. If it's not necessarily seen as good to question someone who's more senior than you, who's got more publications than you, and that we really need to foster this environment that actually, as long as it's coming from a genuine place of curiosity, that questioning is good, and you should be open to people questioning you as well as you questioning others.
Exactly. Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's not just about you rocking the boat. Maybe your boat's being rocked. Somebody else is questioning your status quo, and we need to be open to that too. And it doesn't mean we have to lay down, like, oh, well, I must be wrong because I'm being questioned. Like, no, you can still support the position that you've taken, but do it in dialogue rather than competing monologues. Have discussion, be open to new data, um, and open to new viewpoints on that data. Sometimes the data hasn't changed, but the understanding of it has. So that's something I've talked about in the past, where there's a difference between data and information. Data is just data. Information is data that's been made useful in some fashion, but it can be made useful in different directions, and we've all seen that happen. You have something where just, like, let's just take a simple example, something experiment where let's say there are two factors, temperature and pH. Well, if you only focus on one of those factors, the other one can go wild. Well, you realize, what, in a different environment, maybe the temperature can be lower if the pH is higher. Maybe. It's worth asking. It's worth looking at. So, now I'm talking way over my head here. So, but, the point being is that sometimes it's just the perspective we're taking. Our perspective likes a certain status quo, but if you change your perspective, this status quo may stop even making sense, let alone being the best choice.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I think, with the whole your boat getting rocked, I think, you should not be afraid when people question you and encourage it as well and be open to it and see it as a way of improving yourself and double checking that your thoughts and ways of doing things are actually correct.
Sure. All right. Well, those are most of the thoughts I had about status quo, but I'll let Laura have the final word here if you have anything else to add.
I think we've kind of covered everything, but in summary, I think people should be comfortable questioning the status quo, and we should really try and foster an entire environment of people being able to do that no matter where they are in the hierarchy or where they are in their scientific careers. It should be okay and acceptable for that to happen.
I love it. And hopefully many good things will come out of that. All right. Well, then, on that note, well, I thank you again, Laura, for joining me for this episode of The Happy Scientist, and perhaps we'll see you in the future.
Thank you for listening to the Happy Scientist podcast, helping you to become a happier, healthier, and more productive scientist. To get more Happy Scientist podcast episodes and all of our downloadables, please go to bitesizebio.com/The Happy Scientist, all one word. And in particular, you might want to spend some time on episodes 1 to 9, where we talk about the foundational principles of human needs, core mindsets, and charisma factors, which we refer to in many episodes. You can also hook up with us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Happy Scientist Podcast, all one word, to get latest episodes and additional material. We hope to see you there.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.